Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we keep diving into the Skaven type box with the mighty Lord Vigilant, and a quick but crazily effective and very intentional take on speed-painted Grimdark style. As per your overwhelming request, and to make a counterpoint to the colorful, illustrational Skaven of the last video, the first Stormcast of the series must be dedicated to a dark fantasy interpretation. Grimdark is very dear to my heart. It's literally one of the foundations of the channel, and the topic of my very first video. That, even if cinematically a bit dated, is still one of my most popular. But this paint job and process will be quite different from what you expect from the topic. So stay until the end because I'm sharing a different perspective and a bunch of cool new procedural ideas and tools to conjure the grim darkness on your models. I rarely need to do any complex gap filling or using sandpaper on modern GW kits, but the gap on the cape of this kit was brutal. So be aware that you need to invest a good amount of sprue glue and extra care on this step when you build your model. And since I'm sure you'll ask in the comments, the link for the insert bases is in the description. I start the work priming with the general undertone of my scene. I often use this step to set the literal color of my shadows, but in this case the first layer of reddish-brown is there mostly to add a warm, rusty, decaying feel to the piece, like the sepia tone of an old picture, that will optically and moodily influence all the colors I'll be layering on top, while also still appearing in purity from the steepest lower angles. Ooh, and I skipped black simply because I don't need that kind of value for the execution of my plan, making it just a loss of time and effort. And I immediately apply a neutral, relatively high-value silver to the armor and all the metallic bits. Because of the thick, grubby, high-friction nature of metallic paints, I hate to paint large, solid, metallic base layers with a brush. But because of those same features, you can also never get a super precise application, even from the most precise airbrushing. And that's why I always paint metals as soon as I can, letting the new layers, or in case of intense opaque overspray, a quick pass of the only previous color, fix the edges of the inevitable messy application. From this high-value starting point, I can officially start my short climb to the higher midtones and the extreme lights. I want a moody, desaturated, gritty, deep and dark end result, so I need to establish super bright lights. It may seem like a contradiction, but let me elaborate. This paint job will be aesthetically and procedurally made by the lower midtones and shadows. They're modeling around shapes and volumes, and over the intrinsic local colors. So, to have the technical freedom to mostly paint with the shadows, I need a colorful and bright canvas, able to accept all those upcoming dark values, and give me the literal space to add more shades and go deeper and deeper, without immediately becoming just a dark, muddy mess with no definition, especially important for the readability of the piece from the distance of the gaming table. Still, note that I never reach pure white as I usually do, because even with these technical needs, I don't want anything, except for the core of the magic flame, to reach true pure white and its value. In the mainstream consciousness, Grimdark has kind of become a label for a very specific, quite standardized, practical way of painting. But in my mind, it's purely a vibe and a mood that aspires to catch the gritty dark soul of fantasy illustrations from the 70s to 90s period. And to do that, you really don't need specific procedures or canonic mandatory products. Painting a gloomy environment and a tenebrous character is conceptually identical to painting a luminous hero in a vibrant, warm, sunny day. In both cases, you need to understand the core elements of the palette and values of the scene, and then render them in a way that makes your brain read it as the real thing. Of course, when we'll move to the larger, more blurry mass of infantries and troops, we are going to take advantage of quick, unfocused washes, and I'll show you the roots and origins of all the classic weathering techniques and enamel products. But this is a main hero, and even in a speed painting context, for these central, single, eye-catching pieces, I want my painting to be intentional, thoughtful and deliberate, and not just happening. I close this foundational stage in more or less an hour, using the brush for a single pass of slightly diluted contrast Nasdaq yellow over the metallic silver to turn a few bits into a yellowish-brown base for the gold. And a general pass of matte varnish. Yup! The guy that never uses varnish because it makes everything two-dimensional, flat and dull is using varnish. Why am I making this exception to my rule? Well, because I want to make everything two-dimensional, flat and dull. Ooh, and also extremely receptive and absorbent for oil paints. This is absolutely not a protective layer. Being a single light pass of a water-based product, it's actually way weaker than any of my previous thick layers of tough street art paints. I use it for the look and aesthetic of the finish, that will push the grittiness and the general contrast into an interesting pinch between greasy deep shadows and high-value, shiny, true metallic highlights. And I'm using a couple of Abteilung 502 weathering oils next to my usual art store oils, precisely for their glossier finish and greasier nature. This oil step is an interesting counterpart to the one used for the Skaven hero in the last video. In that one, I used it with no varnish, after fixing all the general tones and values, and in an extremely light and transparent way, to make the general chromatic flow more flowy and gentle, and sharply underline a few deep recesses. Here, I'm using thicker mixes and more aggressive applications on a sponge-absorbent finish, and in an earlier stage, so I can create a way higher contrast between lights and deepest shadows, basically defining the extremes of my range, and the frame of my operating field for the work on lower midtones and higher shadows that I mentioned before. I'm also cleaning in a broader way, with bigger sponges, to leave more paint in the recesses, outlining the model with a deeper, stronger and more nervous dark definition that better recalls the style of the old illustrations. But as you can see, the cleaning of the upper surfaces is very thorough and precise, because again, this is not messy weathering, this is a quick way to fix my deepest shadows. And yeah, marginally a way to tone down a bit the vibrancy of the foundational tones, that, for speed and simplicity, I applied as they are straight from their bottles. With no waiting time in between, I immediately move back to the airbrush. And with these margins of lights and shadows in place, the work on the theatrical mid-shadows, even if absolutely crucial, is just a quick, easy and forgiving step of just 3 colors and 3 gentle, transparent applications. I basically move backwards on the existing ladder of my lights that go from warm to cold, starting from a cold, desaturated turquoise, then to a warm, desaturated magenta, that, in the transparency of their overlap, encapsulate all the intermediate tones I had to use in the opaque layering of the lights. and I close with a pass of black diluted with a good 75% of water to make it less strong, covering and invasive. This is the only color that I didn't use straight from the bottle in the whole process. If you are veterans of the channel, you know that I don't like pure black in the shadows. I want the value of black, but never the uninteresting, achromatic color of black. And this is actually not an exception. I'm for sure using its desaturating, graying effect, but relying on the high translucency of the high dilution, I'm not building up real black anywhere. Just pushing the dark values and the general desaturation of the lower bits and angles. Burnt umber is applied in a similar technical fashion, but for totally different reasons. This is not a shadow, but a controlled filter that reintroduces the melancholic, washed-out sepia tones of old pictures and ancient paintings that we talked about at the beginning. You know that indiscriminate, all-swallowing reddish tone that you get from streaking grime? This is that vibe, but applied with total control over placement and intensity, to avoid killing a bunch of interesting chromatic and temperature contrasts. To maintain the desaturated and dirty look in the stage of sharper definition, without taking any risk, and without the need of thinking too much, I use the Zorn Limited Palette. If you want to know more about this color system, I have more than a few videos in the archive about its magic. But for the sake of simplicity, I stretch it to its extended version, that includes Cerulean Blue and or Viridian, that Zorn himself uses when the subject of the painting involves a lot of water and sky. In my case, a lot of blue-green heraldry and fur feathers of Chocobo. Here, I'm not using the limited palette as a painting exercise, but just to get its automatic gentle and melancholic harmonies in a speed painting environment. So in this particular situation, I don't feel too guilty for the bastardization of the limited palette. I'm trying to be more painterly and a bit impressionistic with my brushwork, putting a lot of emphasis on heavy, clearly visible textures that are a staple of the style, to the point of even introducing real textures on the smooth plastic. But still, grimdark shouldn't be an excuse to be sloppy. And except for a looser grip on the brush and more abstract strokes, I treat the subject as usual, looking for readability and sharpness on textures that, even with some roughness, still give the impression of real, different materials. And I soon reached the point of needing the big picture to guide my work. So I quickly introduced the water effect in the recess base using a transparent UV resin. I also needed a coffee, and that was the perfect timing to let the viscous resin flow into the deepest recesses of the base before the curing pass. I treat metallic highlights like any other highlight, just introducing a larger gap between the values of base and light. Basically a non-metallic approach applied to true metal, to increase the contrast and make the reflections look sharper and more intense. And they also get an extra boost of contrast from the fact that they are made by shiny metallic paint directly over a metal that lost its sheen under the matte varnish. That's literally a double amount of contrast. And because of the theme, nothing is clean and linear, but a mass of scratches and battle damage. I use a pinch of sepia ink to tint the same bright silver and make my own desaturated highlights for the gold bits. And since the grimdark look often puts the accent on the realistic nature of the materials, I use my most realistic true metallic paint for the final flashes of extreme light. Nothing is more metallic than calligraphy inks that are made to simulate the look of illuminated medieval tomes. Also very thematically pertinent. Finally, the step you have all been waiting for: weathering. I always do my weathering at the end, because it's when it chronologically happens in real life. You first dress up, and then a pigeon drops poop on your cape. And yeah, I'm not using any enamel, oil, or solvent-based product, but classic gouache and watercolors. Not because I have anything against those tools. I literally used oils in a previous step, and you know how much I love them. But again, to show that you have alternatives, and that it's not a product that makes the result, but your brain and hands. The keyword is again intentional. We are not using these paints because they make an automatic effect, but because they give us different opportunities and creative freedom. In this case, watercolors and gouache encapsulate the same key features of enamels. Longer working time, the ability to reactivate a dry layer, in this case with just simple water, and a nice matte and opaque finish, perfect to render dry effects like dust, old mud, and general dirt. Watercolors are actually more forgiving to use, because you can reactivate and erase an application eternally, with basically zero impact and stress on the surface. While enamels, in a relatively short time, fix themselves permanently on the surface. And again, they offer different possibilities that, of course, in a normal job I would totally combine. Using water as solvent here, make watery smudges with a coffee stain profile is super easy. While when using solvent, it's easier to create borderless, soft diffusions, for example. So keep an open mind on the possibilities. Again, possibilities, not constrictions. Ooh, and dry watercolors are really tough and stable enough for display, but for gaming models I suggest adding a light pass of varnish to permanently block them in place. And here is the final result. More or less 3 hours of work, as always mostly dedicated to the post-oil stages of sharpening and defining, that, not by chance, are the ones where I get the strongest dose of fun and flow state. I know, 3 hours for a single model is not the timing of a classic speedy speed painting, but I consider fully finishing a major hero in this quality in a brief painting session a great success. And trust me, if you want those clients and commissions to keep coming, pushing on the gas pedal a bit more for the central characters is always a good idea. So, what's next? I'm thinking about Skaven totally painted in oils. What do you think? If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials, or watch me painting live on Twitch. Check the schedule of the streams on the Twitch homepage. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!